Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about working with adolescents. Let's start off by talking about adolescent physical development. We have to talk about puberty when we talk about adolescent physical development. Typically, puberty happens between the ages usually of 12 to 18 years. Puberty is defined as the years of rapid growth and sexual maturation that complete the transition from child to adult in terms of many different things that we're going to talk about. The process of puberty takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years, and it's marked by an increase in hormones in both males and females. Puberty is marked in girls by their getting their periods and their bodies begin to change. For example, their breasts mature, they widen the hips. In boys, puberty means they undergo physical changes as well. They develop hair, facial hair, and they experience usually the growth spurt. That includes the growth of their sexual organs as well. Their voices deepen and they start to produce sperm. The typical age of puberty is just under 13 years of age, right around 13, although it varies widely. Many factors can impact the onset of puberty, especially among girls. Such factors include genes, body fat, and stress. There are also cultural variations as well. The best indicator of when somebody will enter puberty is when their parent did. So when you look at the physical development, you also have to look at the moodiness that comes along with that. The increase in hormones, the hormones that are surging in both males and females. Often this is accompanied by outbursts of sudden anger, sadness, and irritation, combined with reactions to other people to the changes in the teenager. It's always important to be on the lookout for the physical development, the issue of body image. So let's talk about that for a second. Body image, we're referring to the concerns that many adolescents have about their changing bodies. Body image issues may arise during any of this time. Adolescents tend to focus on and exaggerate imperfections in their body, as well as comparing themselves to others. Girls may want to be thinner, whereas boys tend to want to look taller and stronger. So continuing on this, let's talk about the sexual development. During puberty, sex hormones are responsible for the physical development in both males and females, and for other changes as well. The hormones trigger thoughts and emotions so that adolescents become more interested in sexual activity. Romances often begin in adolescence, and about half of all US teens do become sexually active during this time. Most of the numbers indicate it is upwards of 3/4, 75%. Typically, children and then adolescents progress through relationships in the following way. First, they have groups of friends that are typically of their own gender. Girls tend to stay with girls, boys tend to stay with boys. Then there's a loose association of girls and boys, mainly interacting within a crowd. You'll often see this at the beginning of middle school start to happen. Next, small mixed-sex groups of members of the crowd begin to form, and then Finally, adolescents begin to form couples, with relationships becoming more private and less group focused. Oops, let me go back here. First romances typically begin in high school and rarely last more than a year. Females are more likely than males to have a steady partner. Breakups are common, as are crushes, and typically you'll see this in the high school peer group. Adolescents tend to react strongly to rejection, in severe cases even contemplating revenge. Or it can shoot somebody into a pretty severe depression. Peer group support is helpful for such ups and downs. When we look at cognitive development during these adolescent years, it's typical for adolescents to think intensely just about themselves and what others think of them. This is egocentrism. Egocentrism is common in early adolescence among both males and females and across every ethnic group. This leads adolescents to think of themselves as unique, special, and more socially significant. That is, they are noticed by everyone than they actually are. This means that they believe what they observe in others must be directly related to them, the world revolving around them. Very important during this time is the emotional and social development of adolescence. Adolescence is a period marked by a search for identity and a time for self-discovery, self-expression, and self-concept become increasingly important. Adolescents try to answer the question of, who am I? Especially with regard to religion, politics, vocation, and sexuality. In their search for identity, adolescents will evaluate the goals and values of their parents and culture, keeping the pieces that make sense to them and discarding others, maybe trying them on for a time and then trying something else on to see how it fits. Relationships with families are very important during this stage. Families continue to be influential, and though not surprisingly, there is an increase in rebellion and bickering between parents and adolescents. Adolescents are seeking independence and freedom, but they also still need parental support. The most successful families have good communication and warmth while allowing adolescents to develop independence. Too much control can interfere with the development of the adolescent. They are trying and attempting to become an adult, and too much control doesn't allow them to go through that process of making mistakes, hopefully in a more safe environment. On this slide, this slide and the next slide are mental health facts for children and teens. It's very important to look at the incidence of mental health diagnosis and the impact. Specifically, I want you to look at the suicide number there. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in youth among ages 10 to 24. 90% of them had underlying mental illness. Here are the warning signs that are important to know for a mental health diagnosis, and very important, 4 things you can do. You need to talk to the doctor or mental health specialist, work with the school, and connect with other families. Let's talk for a few minutes about teens and drug use. So, experimentation, is it normal in drug use? Absolutely, it is in our culture. Experimentation is a developmental task. We are supposed to try out new things and test limits as a teen. Again, remember that trying on of different things. Sometimes this is an area where teens can get into certainly some trouble, but it's also something to expect. So we talk about this as a continuum. So there's experimentation, there's social use, there's binge use, and there's chronic use. So experimentation is just that, trying something. Let's take alcohol, having a beer, having a drink when they are underage. Going from there to social use. They go to a party and everyone is drinking beer, and so they drink beer at the party, but that's the only time they do when it's socially indicated. Then the next two are much more worrisome. There's the chronic use, there's the binge use. This is when a person intakes a great amount in a short period of time. And then chronic use, this is using on a routine basis. Parental overreaction with experimentation is the primary clinical issue when the problem is just truly experimentation. So let me say that again. Sometimes parents will say, my child has a problem with alcohol or with drugs, when actually the problem is the parent expecting the child to never experiment. It's a hard thing to kind of get our head around. We'll talk about this in much more detail in other classes. The concern should begin when circles of friends change, schoolwork begins to suffer, because remember, school is a barometer in adolescence for overall wellness, or when secondary problems begin, such as legal charges or suspension from school. So what is the key to prevention? Interestingly, most research supports that the key to prevention is keeping teens busy and supervised between the hours of 2:30 to 6 p.m. This is a time when they're often the least supervised, and they're most likely to be bored if they don't have something else to do. And boredom often leads to experimentation going a little bit too far. So I've mentioned there are some tasks here that we have in adolescence. So if you look at these, adjusting to sexually maturing bodies and feelings, developing abstract thinking skills, developing a more complex level of perspective taking, being able to look at something from someone else's perspective, developing coping skills, identifying their meaningful moral standards and values and belief system, understanding and expressing more complex emotional experience. Everything is not black and white. There's a lot of gray. They form friendships that are mutually close and supportive, establish key aspects of identity. They meet the demands of increasing mature roles, and they renegotiate relationships with adults, especially their parents. So what can teen caregivers do? Well, we listed out some things here, but the one I want to bring your attention to, most importantly, is keeping rules to a minimum, but enforcing those rules consistently. At this point, research states that we should have rules that are only safety related, such as not getting in a car with somebody who's been drinking or using drugs, not walking alone after dark, specific safety related rules. Interestingly, if a parent is to suggest they think it's for safety, their child not hang out with someone else who they have deemed not a good influence on their child, that tends to just push that child closer to that other relationship. So be careful with that. Rules to a minimum, enforce consistently, and safety related. So, how do we build resilience in children and teen? We need to make connections. That child and teenager needs to make connections, not just with the parents, although that's very important, but other connections with other adults and individuals. Instilling in the child the benefit of helping others, having a daily routine, knowing when to take a break and having some downtime. This is becoming more and more important. Teaching your child self-care and what that means to the child, not just to the parent. Oops, I did it again. Moving towards goals that the child or adolescent sets. The goal must be set from the adolescent's point of view, not the parents. Having a positive self-view. Keeping things in perspective. Oh, a hard one, isn't it? And maintaining a hopeful outlook. Look for opportunities for self-discovery and accepting that change is a part of living. Please make sure you read all of the linked reading in the module and let me know if you have any questions at all.